This is Zestology, the podcast all about energy, vitality and motivation. I'm Tony Whiting, come to you from central London, very close to Piccadilly Circus, but on a kind of quiet bit. And I'm preparing to go and see the comedian Bridget Christie. But before that, today's podcast, I need to issue a stern warning. And that is, the content on this podcast is absolutely brilliant if you are interested in sport. And I clearly am interested in sport. That's my day job. I work at Sky Sports 3 days a week. But Zestology tends to cover other matters, doesn't it? And so if you're someone who's not that into sport, you might just want to move along. Nothing to see. Delete this podcast and I'll see you next Monday. I don't like to encourage you not to listen to podcasts, but if you're into sport, or if you're into learning from sportsmen and women, I think you will really like this podcast. If you're not into cricket, especially, you might want to give it a miss. There's a bit of a cricket geek out going on. So the podcast is with Pete Cohen, who has worked with many sportsmen and women all around this country and around the world as well. And he's a real expert at getting the best out of sportsmen and women. And in this podcast, you will hear how to win at sport. You'll also hear who my favourite sportsman is. And you'll hear a bit of a cricket geek out too, so consider yourself duly warned on that front. Pete is excellent. I've wanted to connect with him for ages, and actually this podcast was me on his podcast, and it's an excerpt from the full podcast which you can hear over on the My 365 podcast. So yeah, thanks to Pete for kind of interviewing me on his podcast. And if you're not into cricket, you might want to give it a miss. But if you are interested in how to win and what you can kind of apply from mental game in sports into your daily life, you're going to love it. And at the very least, it's a bit of cricket chat. Here he is then, Pete Cohen, not really on Zestology, it's more me on my 365 podcast talking to Pete Cohen about how to win at sport. And we start off with my favourite sports person.
I have to ask you this question first. What is it about cricket that you love so much?
Well, I love the complexity of it and the mental side of it as well. And, you know, for many years, because I've been working at Sky for so long, one of the ways that I amuse myself is I sometimes compile little lists at Sky on a quiet moment. And I will make a note of when I think someone has kind of upset the odds with a mental approach and done particularly well. And I've realized over the years that my favorite sportsmen and women are not actually the most talented, but they're the ones who I think have quite average talent and elevate themselves to a different level with a strong and solid mental approach to
Okay, so tell me, there might be a bit of interrupting going on here because I just get excited. So tell me when you say that. So who are some of the examples of some of those sports people? Start off with cricket.
Yeah, I give you an example in cricket. Perfect example is Andrew Strauss, who was an opening batsman and in my opinion, talented, but certainly not as talented as someone like Kevin Peterson. But through a solid amount of talent and a lot of hard work and mental discipline, he achieved an incredible career and played, almost 100 times for England. And what was really interesting about Strauss is he had quite a few slumps, big slumps in his career. And, using mental fortitude, he kind of always managed to kind of pull himself out of them. So he's a perfect example in cricket.
I think Steve Waugh is a great example of Steve Waugh, and his brother, Mark Waugh, was incredibly talented and like Kevin Peterson. But Steve Waugh had that kind of, I just know, that knuckle down, that mental strength. And I think that you like the same thing that I like, which is, look, it's not about talent, right? Talent is only going to take you so far. You need a lot more than talent. You need dedication, and you need to be into mastery, that whole concept of just getting better at things. And we can all do that. And I hope people that are listening, whether you like cricket or not, is to understand that anyone can have success, but there's no substitute for just the discipline of working to get better at things.
Yeah, and perhaps I also relate to it because I was never the most naturally gifted sportsman growing up. And I've always had to really work at it when I want to, whatever it is. I play quite a bit of table tennis now with my mates, and I know what I do when I'm playing well, and I know what I do when I'm playing badly. And I have to really think about that. It doesn't come naturally.
Well, it's taking responsibility and I think it doesn't come naturally to most of us, because most of us are living our life. We don't stop and look back and kind of question how we're living our lives, especially if we don't switch off. But I have to ask you, do you know Dave Fulton?
Yes, I do. Yeah, he's one of my colleagues at Sky.
Right. So Dave was, when I worked at Kent, so I told this story the other day. So I was the sports psychologist to the Kent cricket team in 1999 when John Wright he was the coach who used to open the batting for New Zealand. And Dave, I was so excited because I loved cricket. I grew up, one of my first memories was seeing my dad bowling. My dad was an extremely dangerous fast bowler. And I just loved to play. From 6 years old, I just played. So when I got a chance to work in professional cricket, I was so excited. And I remember turning up at Canterbury and they were playing a game. And I was really unimpressed by just the lack of passion, I suppose.
Really?
The lack of players admitting that they were vulnerable. But Dave was one of those people who really wanted to get better. And in fact, if anyone wants to see something pretty horrific.
Yes, I know. Yeah, I know what you're going to say now.
I gave a talk. So you can Google it, Dave Fulton. This is where he gets a ball in the eye. I think it's Simon Willis was putting balls into a bowling machine, and it was up to like 90 miles an hour. And he put a ball in when he wasn't ready. And the ball bounced and went straight through his visor and blinded him in one eye. And what I love about this story was, in fact, Dave showed that in public for the first time when I was with him. And he told me after, he said, I've never shown anyone this. But now, after that, it kind of went all viral. But he was also, that was his first season as being captain of the cricket team. And, also know that, I don't know whether he ever told you this story, but he got a phone call once saying that he's been picked for England. Did he ever tell you this story?
No, he hasn't.
Right. He got picked for England and on a Friday, I think. And then on a Monday, he was told that he wasn't picked because the opening batsman, Mark Butcher, was injured, but then seemed to have made an incredible recovery. And Nasser Hussain says that Dave Fulton is the most unluckiest cricketer to never play for England. But what I love about him is it didn't destroy him. That's what I really like about him. His ability to deal with adversity and to rise above it. And that's why I think sports people can be, they can be great role models. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And in the instance of Dave, it's really interesting with what he did. As you say, very unlucky not to play for England. And what I've seen more recently, I've known him for over 10 years, actually, before he joined Sky. And when I think he just retired as a professional cricketer. But now he is a presenter at Sky, as many people will know listening, and probably some people don't know. And he has approached that career with exactly the same sense of determination. Really, because he'd never done any broadcasting. And as you know, it tends to be the Ian Bothams of this world to whom major broadcasters will turn when they retire. When Joe Root retires from playing cricket, he'll be a broadcaster if he wants to be, because he's captained England and he's, very chatty chap and everything else. And Dave wasn't necessarily top of the list for that, but because of sheer determination, the fact he really put in the hours, he does all the county cricket for Sky now on Sky Sports News. He's a presenter on Sky Sports News. He's a reporter as well. He presents a lot of the international cricket too. And he's really put in the hours for that. So it's interesting, isn't it, that it mirrors his career and in cricket.
But again, isn't it? It's all about that whole mastery, wanting to get better. And I must tell you, the first cricketer I ever worked with, I met him at the Cheltenham Cricket Festival, and his name was Keith Arthurton, left-handed batsman for West Indies. And he, in the World Cup, I think he got 0-0-1 and was devastated. And I met him, and he had got a contract to play for High Wycombe. And I said, look, I think I can help you. So I met him on the day, early in the morning of a cricket match that he was playing in. And he basically told me, he said, look, I am frightened to even pick up a bat. I'm so nervous. So I had been studying hypnosis at that time. And I thought, right, I'm just going to try a technique that someone had shown me how to do. So I hypnotized him. And I said, who's your favorite cricketer, of all time? And it was Viv Richards.
Right.
who was actually my hero as well.
Yes, and funnily enough, kind of mine as well.
Absolute,
Yeah.
absolute legend. And then I said, so I said, imagine that you're Viv Richards, but I forgot to tell in telling him this. I'm sure he kind of worked it out, but he's a left-handed batsman and Viv Richards was a right-handed batsman. Anyway, I did this and I got him out of the trance, and he said, "Yeah, you know what? I'm ready to go." And he was seriously pumped up. He was a fit person anyway. And he goes out to bat, and he basically got 165 runs in this game of cricket. And this is when I started to realize, wow, this mental stuff, hypnosis, it really works. But what was fascinating was there was one shot where he hit the ball behind him.
Yeah.
And for those of you that don't know, if you hit the ball behind you, the other batsman will tell you when to run. So he says to him, "Keith, go, yes, run." And Keith's looking at him as if to say, "Who are you talking to?" Because he was absolutely convinced that he was Viv Richards.
No way.
Yeah. And he told me that it was the most, and it's amazing what we can convince ourselves.
Yeah.
If we want to. And I must say this to everyone, since we're talking about cricket, I'm sure you've seen the film Fire in Babylon.
Yes, fairly recently, actually. And which is why it's very top of mind, you talking about Viv Richards, because he is, were you going to talk about him then?
Well, we'll talk about that film because, again, I would encourage everyone to watch that film. Tell us a little bit about what that film did for you and about Viv Richards and his role in that film.
Yeah, firstly, there's a really interesting political element to the film, which would mean that anyone would enjoy it. And I'm on a kind of a continuing mission to persuade my girlfriend to get into cricket, and it's not working at all.
Mm-hmm.
But
luck.
But she loved Fire in Babylon. So I would recommend it to everyone, however into cricket you are. But also Viv Richards as a man, I never quite knew, and I've delved into some other documentaries and books about him. A compelling leader, an incredible presence, and an unwavering belief in his own ability. You know, some people and some men are born to lead, and he is one of them. And even at the age of 60 or 65 or 70, whatever he is now, talking in this documentary, he has so much presence. It is incredible.
When you say about born to lead, I'm writing a book at the moment about leadership and that age-old question of, are leaders born or are they made? I actually think that they are made, but they're made by something that is driving them. And I think what drove him was, as you well know, and everyone watches the film, it was so much more than just playing cricket. And there was one of the opening batsmen for the West Indies, not Gordon Greenidge.
Desmond Haynes?
No, actually, sorry. Sorry. It was Gordon Greenidge.
Okay.
He told me about that film. And I watched the film and I was absolutely blown away. I couldn't believe I didn't know anything about it. Basically, the West Indies were the laughing stock of cricket, and they went within a few years to become the best in the world, unbeaten in Test cricket for 15 years. But I couldn't believe when I watched that film where the captain of England at that time, Tony Greig, who was originally from Rhodesia, saying, we're going to make them grovel. And saying that to a group of people whose ancestry is slavery, we're going to make them grovel, that lit something up inside them, especially him. And he went out and got 215 runs in that first Test match.
Yeah.
And this great film of becoming, the laughing stock to the best team in the world. Again, I think that just sends out a message of what is possible. But I think what I'd like to ask you is, why do you think when we watch documentaries or films where we see someone overcoming the odds or a team overcoming the odds, do you think that's doing to us inside? Because it definitely makes a change to me when I watch a film like that.
Yeah, it does. Because, there's that old quote, which isn't actually based in any kind of science, but it is, you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I think Jim Rohn said it originally. And, that there's whether it's 5 or 10 or 15 or, how he actually came to that equation, nobody really knows. But the theory is, if you surround yourself with people who are positive, you're likely to kind of look at the world a little bit more positive. If you surround yourself with a load of moaners, you're likely to be a bit of a moaner, and so on.
Yeah.
And I think it applies to culture as well. So if you go and watch 7 series of Mad Men and you study Don Draper in and out, you are likely to potentially take on some of his mannerisms and attitudes, by the way, both positive and negative, because you're kind of filling your head with it. I don't know, like again, I think it's just surrounding yourself with cultural kind of inspiration, whether it is positive or negative, probably does have an impact. What do you think?
Well, I've been watching Luther recently, and I watched a few series of that when it came out. And there was one I watched the other. I'm kind of, when I start watching something, I want to see it all the way through.
Yeah.
So there's 4 series, but there was one where my wife had to get up and leave the room, and then because it was really graphic, and I was thinking,
so it's a crime show, isn't it?
Yeah, he's what's his name? Bulbus. That's
Idris Elba.
Yeah, Idris Elba, which he's a fantastic actor, and I think he's lined up to be the next James Bond, which would be awesome. Which would be obviously different for the obvious reasons. He plays Mandela. I haven't seen that. I'm actually going to South Africa in a few weeks for the first time, but that's another story. It's very dark and very, I don't know, just graphic. And I was thinking 20 years ago, those sorts of programs wouldn't have been allowed on the BBC, but they now are allowed, just like all these other things that we were talking about are allowed for us to, not switch off and look at social media all the time. But when I went to bed, all I could see was what I had saw. And I just don't think most of us realize just how we think, what we feed our brains, what we feed our bodies, how that affects our life. And I know that's what obviously Zestology is all about and what you're all about. As we kind of bring this, I mean, we could talk for hours, especially about cricket. I only feel like we've only just sort of scratched the scratch of that surface. But what I want to ask you is, what would you want the legacy of your life, to be? How do you want to be remembered? And Tony, what sort of mark do you want to leave on this earth?
Well, it's a big question, isn't it? And I suppose, it is. And, I mean, when we go up that pyramid we talked about earlier on, to love, to give, to communicate, as time has gone on, I mean, as you know, I kind of trained in NLP many years ago and then started bringing out NLP related audiobooks. And then I got a 3-book deal with Virgin Books to bring out NLP related books, Confidence in a Minute, Relax in a Minute, and Persuade in a Minute. And it's funny because more recently, I've kind of veered away from NLP a bit. And I really do like to kind of consider ideas rather than preach. And my favorite teachers actually all do the same thing anyway. You're absolutely an example of that. It's like, oh, hey, here you go. Here's an idea. You might want to do it. You might not want to. And I think I think that's because I'm such a keen observer of communication. And so, continuing to do what I do. I don't have too many kind of grandiose ideas about how I'd like to be remembered, I must admit. But my priorities would probably be to kind of achieve everything I want to achieve, but leave plenty of time for having fun, spending time with my family along the way.
What I love so many things out of what you've said. I really do. I think we've touched on so many things I talk about, but we've just talked about them from a different perspective, and we haven't preached. What I love is giving people an opportunity just to look at things differently. And what I really love and appreciate about who you are is that you don't pigeonhole yourself. You can do multiple different things. When people say, I am an accountant or I am this, rather than you are being who you really choose to be. You're looking to grow. You're looking to get better. And I would encourage people to follow you, not literally, because that would be a bit weird. I've often thought that would be a brilliant YouTube video. I've got 5,000 followers and here they are. But I'm sure someone's already thought of that.
But listen, before we wrap up the chat about sport, because obviously I've been really looking forward to talking to you about it. And I've loved talking about cricket, but I know you've worked in other sports as well. What would be, if you, and I know this is hard, but is there anything that you that is an absolute go-to when you work with sportsmen and women in terms of improving your game? And it might be something that's applicable to non-sporting activities as well.
It's a great question.
Only because I want it for my table tennis skills.
Well, it's actually something very simple to say. It's not always the easiest thing to do. So I spent 2 years of my life working with Ronnie O'Sullivan, which was truly fascinating.
Yes,
and
fantastic.
Yeah, I really became very good friends with him, and I really got to learn a lot about him because he's extremely talented. And often people would say, you're just really lucky, Ronnie, because you're really talented. But what they fail to realize is just how much work he had done to get to where he was, and probably worked just as hard, or if not harder, than everybody else. But the thing with him is he hated losing. And the same with Stephen Hendry. They both hated losing. It would age them. It would destroy them inside. Everything about them wanted to win. And as Ronnie got older, he realized that his A game, he wasn't always on it. So he had to find a new way of playing, which is what we call being hard to beat. So he really focused on being hard to beat. He really focused on making it difficult for his opponent. But that's not the advice. The advice that came out of all of that, which is, Ronnie, how much do you want to win? And that was obvious. Okay, well, the ultimate price of wanting to win is to forget about winning and just focus on what is actually taking place in the moment. And, people call that the zone or the flow. And he became very good at that. He was very critical. So when you're critical of yourself, you're not being in the moment. So my advice to you when you're playing table tennis is just see how much you can get immersed in what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're feeling. So you're just there. And that's something which everyone can do in their life, because it's great to set goals. It's great to be striving towards things. But inevitably, I suppose, if you're not there to enjoy what you're doing because you're always thinking about what's in front of you, then that's a life of missed opportunities to enjoy the moment. So let me know how you get on with that with table tennis, and I'll send you a bill.
Well, actually, it's really interesting because I totally agree with you, and I know that I think part of the reason I was never very good at sport growing up is simply because I so wanted to be good.
Yeah,
and in more recent years, I have exactly, and in more recent years, I have kind of started to. There's been times when I thought, right, I'm not going to actually even worry about the score. I'm just going to focus on doing what I do as well as I can, which achieved two things. Firstly, I would kind of each individual bit of skill, playing table tennis, for example, each kind of forehand smash that if I was really worried about winning the match point I might not have made, I would appreciate in greater detail. And then also I won a lot more games as well. So
yeah, it's such a simple thing. I would encourage everyone that's listened to this podcast to take a few moments and think about what's your biggest takeaway. For me, it's always great to talk about cricket, but it's also great to just think about the spreading ourselves too thin, and also just switching off. Some people call it a digital sunset, whatever it is, just turning technology off so you can be present where you are. I've really, really enjoyed this podcast.
Yeah, it's been great.
Please tell us where we can find out more about you. How can we follow you? Where can we get your books from? Where is your podcast? Everything.
Yeah, well, I'm on Sky 3 days a week on Sky Sports News, and I tend to present some sports for Sky as well. And I present quite a few of the Q sports actually for Sky, which is really interesting. You talking about Ronnie O'Sullivan, and then the podcast is called Zestology, and my website's TonyWrighton.com. So you can find everything there, and we'll have to have another sporting geek out soon. You know what I'm thinking? We should record a podcast. I'm actually a member at Surrey Cricket, which is pretty geeky, but there you go.
No. Listen,
a podcast sitting in the stands.
Alex, sorry, say that again.
We should record a podcast sitting in the stands.
Listen, I would be all up. I'd be up for that. I tell you, one of my heroes actually was Alex Stewart. Well, he still is. And Alex Stewart, I remember talking to Carl Hooper, who I knew when he worked at Kent. Sorry, another West Indian, and he said that the greatest player that they ever played against was Alex Stewart. But Alex Stewart, when he played for England, wasn't particularly treated very well in terms of being put where they thought he would be best, rather than, how to get the best out of people sometimes is just to ask them and say, we want you to play at your best. What number do you need to bat at for you to feel most confident? But that's another story that keeps this whole thing open for another podcast on sports. I really appreciate your time, Tony. This has been a thoroughly entertaining and thought-provoking podcast. So make sure you follow Tony, check out his podcast, check out his books. and watch them on Sky Sports 3 days a week.
3 days a week. Yeah,
Every moment, just turn it on and watch them for 3 days.
Well, I told you it was a bit of a sporting geek out, and yeah, I love sports, so it's nice to have both my professional lives collide and talk a bit more about sport on this podcast. It's just a rare bonus episode. Back to the usual next week, so thank you for listening. I'm pretty much approaching Piccadilly Circus now, as you can hear, so I will say goodbye. I'll see you next week on Zestology. In the meantime, have a good one.